The pressure alarm had been cycling for 6 minutes before Rail Das finally silenced it, not because the problem had resolved, but because he needed to think, and the alarm was not helping him think. 7 kilometers below the cloud deck of Varathroman 4, the descent pod groaned around him. A sound like a hull plate working loose. He knew it wasn't, because he had run his hands over every weld seam twice before departure, but knowing that did nothing for the sound. The port viewport had developed a stress fracture in its outer pane 40 minutes ago, a thin white line running from the lower seal to roughly the center of the glass. It had not propagated. He had noted it in the log, checked it again at 2-minute intervals, and told himself it was stable. He was not entirely sure he believed that. Below him, 600 meters down, something was moving. Rail had descended to recover the mission's primary probe, an autonomous sensor package the size of a freight container that had gone silent 3 days into its own descent, somewhere in the dense lower atmosphere of this gas giant. The science team's theory was a navigation fault, the probe sitting intact at neutral buoyancy, waiting. Their theory was reasonable. It was also, he was increasingly certain, wrong, because the probe's locator beacon was transmitting from a position that changed every 47 minutes, shifting in a pattern that matched nothing in the failure mode library. The probe was not drifting, it was being moved. He had reported this to Commander Shen Varus on the Tascan survey vessel Ardent Crossing, holding station 140 kilometers above in the upper atmosphere. Shen Varus had listened to the report, looked at his track data, and said she would consult with the science lead. That had been 22 minutes ago. He had not heard back. Rail checked the viewport fracture, still stable. He checked the depth gauge and the pressure differential, both nominal for this depth band, which was the one fact working in his favor. He looked at the sonar return below him and watched the contact shift again, slow and deliberate, crossing the display from left to right and then curving back. Whatever was holding the probe was the size of a city block. He had been in survey work for 4 years, had descended into the atmospheres of 11 gas giants, and had never seen a biological return on sonar. The dense lower bands of gas giants were considered uninhabitable by any complex organism, pressure, temperature, the chemistry. Considered. He pulled up the sonar log and ran it back, watching the contacts track across the last 40 minutes, and the word that came to him was not scientific. The word was deliberate. Whatever this was, it was moving with intention. He opened comms to the Ardent Crossing. Shen Varus, the sonar contact is biological, I'm certain of it. He kept his voice level, the way his training had drummed into him. It has the probe. I need a decision on whether I continue descent or abort. A pause. The delay on deep atmosphere comms was significant. Signal had to fight through several kilometers of dense gas to reach the relay buoy 4 kilometers above him, and he used the time to check his power reserves and run a quick diagnostic on the thrusters. 3 seconds. 5. Rail, Shen Varus's voice was careful. Hold at first contact depth. Do not descend further. We're pulling in the xenobiology team and I need. It's rising, he said. Another pause. Say again. The contact is rising. Current trajectory puts it at my depth in approximately 11 minutes. He watched the sonar return, the enormous slow curve of it climbing through the dense gas. It's coming to me. The silence on comms lasted long enough that he ran another diagnostic and checked the viewport fracture twice. When Shen Varus came back, her voice had changed in a way he recognized. The controlled flatness that meant she was handling something she hadn't trained for. Can you ascend faster than it rises? Rail pulled up the thruster output and the buoyancy calculations and ran the numbers in his head. The pod was already at the edge of its rated depth. Full thruster burn in this density would be rough, would put stress on the already compromised viewport, and the fracture line was in the outer pane, not the inner, so structurally he had margin but probably. But Commander, If it has the probe and it's bringing it to me, that's not predatory behavior. That's something else. Silence. What are you recommending, Rail? He looked at the sonar return. The contact was still rising, steady and unhurried, following a curve that would bring it to his depth in roughly 9 minutes now. It was not accelerating. It was not behaving erratically. It was climbing toward him at a pace that felt, against all reason, considered. I'm recommending we wait, he said. I'm recommending we hold position and see what it does. That's not a survey protocol. No, Commander, it isn't, he paused, but it's bringing us the probe. Another long silence. He counted his heartbeats because it was something to do with the part of his brain that wanted to panic. 14, 15, 16. The viewport fracture did not propagate. Hold position, Shenvera said. Do not initiate any action. Do not transmit active sonar. Log everything. Understood. He cut active sonar the moment she signed off and switched to passive only. The contact vanished from the display. Passive sensors at this depth were limited, but he could feel the pod moving now, a low harmonic vibration through the hull, not structural stress, something external. Pressure waves, something very large displacing gas as it climbed. Rail Das was 26 years old. He had grown up on a station that built survey equipment, one of 3 children in a family that repaired pressure housings and calibrated buoyancy systems for a living. He had gone into atmosphere work because he liked the solitude of descent, liked the way a gas giant's upper clouds gave way to denser layers, each transition a kind of arrival at somewhere new. He had always thought of himself as someone who was comfortable with the unknown, and he had always suspected that this self-assessment had never truly been tested. He was revising his assessment now. The vibration changed pitch. Something was close. Then the bioluminescence began. It started below him, faint, diffuse, a greenish-white light rising through the dense gas, not a point source but a field, spread across hundreds of meters, pulsing in a slow rhythm. He watched it through the lower viewport and felt the word come to him again, deliberate. The pulses were not random. They were organized, a pattern of light and dark repeating in sequences of varying length, and as he watched them, something in the engineering part of his brain started counting intervals and noting that the sequences were not repeating identically. They were varying in ways that were too structured to be random. He pulled up the light sensor recording and started logging the pulse sequences. The contact rose to his depth and stopped. He could not see it. It was simply too large and the medium too opaque. But the bioluminescence surrounded him now, a soft field of light pressing in from all sides, and the pressure waves against the hull had gentled to something almost rhythmic, like a slow exhalation. The pod's external temperature sensors registered a 3-degree rise. The viewport fracture remained stable. He opened comms. Shenvaris, it's here. It stopped at my depth. It's producing bioluminescent light in structured sequences. I'm logging the patterns. He kept his voice as flat as he could manage. It is very large. I estimate I am currently inside whatever it is, not swallowed, not contained. More like cradled. He heard someone on the bridge of the Ardent Crossing say something he couldn't make out, and then the xenobiology lead's voice came on, clipped and urgent. The patterns. Are they repeating with variation? Yes. How many distinct sequence types? Rail ran the log back. At least 7, possibly more. Some of the shorter sequences might be variants of the same base pattern. A pause. It's trying to communicate. He almost said he knew that. He stopped himself. What do I do? Do you have any capacity to produce light output externally? The pod had exterior work lights, standardly used for visual inspection of hull welds at depth. He had never used them for anything else. Yes. Can you modulate them? Not precisely. I have 3 intensity levels and a manual pulse switch. A pause so long, he checked the comms indicator to confirm he was still connected. Rael, the xenobiology lead's voice had changed. Reproduce the simplest sequence you can identify in the patterns, exactly as you saw it. Use the work lights. He looked at the log. The simplest sequence in the sensor data was a series of 5 pulses, long, short, long, short, long, with specific intervals between them. He set the work lights to middle intensity, took the manual switch in his hand, and spent a moment getting the timing right in his head. Then he sent it. Long, short, long, short, long. The bioluminescent field went still. For 3 seconds, nothing. The pod's passive sensors registered a pressure change, the entity pulling back slightly, not retreating, he thought, more like taking a breath. Then the field lit up again. The same 5-pulse sequence came back to him, identical, followed immediately by a 6th pulse he hadn't sent, a single long flash. Then it went still again, as if waiting. He reported this to Shenvaris in real time, his voice steady by an act of will he was proud of. The xenobiology lead said, very quietly, "It corrected the sequence. It added the element you omitted." "What did I omit?" "You'll know when you see the full pattern. Rael, add the 6th pulse and send the full corrected sequence back." He did. The response was immediate, not the same sequence again, but an entirely new one, longer, more complex, a cascading pattern of light that took 11 seconds to complete and that his sensors recorded in full. At the end of it, the entity paused, waited. He was being handed a vocabulary. The ascent took 3 hours. Not because it needed to take 3 hours. The pod's rated ascent speed in this density was faster than that, but because the entity rose with him, slowly, matching his rate of climb, and every 400 meters it sent a new sequence, waited for his best reproduction of it, and then modified and returned it before offering the next. By the time he cleared the 40-kilometer depth band, he had 41 sequences logged. By the time he reached the buoy depth and the relay came fully online, he had 63. The entity stopped at 11 kilometers below the cloud deck, at the upper boundary of the dense band. It would not rise further. The gas thinned above that depth, the pressure dropped, and whatever biology sustained something of that scale required what lived below. It stopped there and sent one final sequence, very long, before the bioluminescent field began to fade. He recorded it and told Shenvaris he needed the xenobiology team on that sequence as a priority. The Ardent Crossing pulled him aboard at 1940 hours. The probe was recovered too. It had been released at the moment he sent the first corrected sequence back, found drifting at neutral buoyancy 40 meters below the pod's last position, intact and still logging. The xenobiology lead, Dr. Amara Voss, had the 63 sequences decoded into a preliminary framework by the following morning. She came to the crew mess at 600, looking like she had not slept, and found Rael there ahead of her, eating nothing, watching the sensor log on a tablet. She sat down across from him and turned her own tablet to face him. "The first sequence they taught you was a count, 1 through 5. The element you missed, the 6th pulse, was the number 6, which they added because you stopped at 5. You started counting but didn't complete the set." She paused. "They thought you were confused." He looked at the tablet. "The last sequence, the long one." Voss was quiet for a moment. "It's an invitation. The grammar is rough. We're working from 63 examples, but the intent is clear. It wants us to come back, with more patience." She set the tablet down. "It's been down there a long time, Rael. Long enough to have seen survey vessels in the upper atmosphere before. Long enough to have tried signaling them and gotten nothing back. What it said in that last sequence, roughly translated, is that it is glad someone finally stopped to listen." He sat with that for a moment. Outside the porthole, the cloud tops of Verathroman 4 spread to the horizon, amber and vast, and somewhere below them, in the crushing dark, something ancient was doing what it had done for longer than human civilization had existed on Earth. Waiting. They had not discovered it. It had been waiting for them to be ready. He set down his tablet and looked at the clouds for a long time, and what he felt was not triumph. It was the quiet weight of a debt, the understanding that something patient enough to wait, while humans flew past its home for decades and called it empty, had finally, at the edge of a failing viewport and 600 meters of rising dark, been given reason to believe the wait had been worth it. He owed it more patience than he possessed. He intended to learn more.